The air in the boardroom crackles, thick with unspoken words and the scent of expensive cologne and fear. My father sits at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, his face a granite mask. To his right, my husband, Mark Preens. He catches my eye and gives a small, almost imperceptible smirk. The smirk of a victor. He thinks this meeting is his coronation. He thinks Dad is about to anoint him, the brilliant son-in-law, the savior of the family business, the one who will finally bring order to the chaos he subtly implies I represent. The silence stretches, taut as a wire. My heart hammers against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I clutch the worn leather portfolio in my lap, its contents the culmination of sleepless nights and a resolve forged in betrayal. My father clears his throat. The sound echoes. Mark leans forward, a wolf scenting blood. Then, Dad reaches into his breast pocket. Not for a pen to sign Mark's assent, but for a slim, folded sheaf of documents. He doesn't look at Mark. His gaze, heavy with a meaning I'm only just beginning to decipher, lands on me. He unfolds the papers. His voice, when he speaks, is steady, a low rumble that fills the sudden vacuum. After careful consideration, he begins, his eyes still locked on mine, and a thorough review of performance, potential, and unwavering dedication to the future of this company. He pauses. Mark's smile widens, a ghastly, confident rictus. I have made my decision. He slides the papers across the table. Not towards Mark. Towards me. Congratulations, Amelia. My father says, a small, proud smile finally breaking through his stern facade. You are now the majority shareholder and CEO of Thornton Industries. The words hang in the air. Ownership.
As me.
The papers, crisp and official, lie before me. My name, Amelia Thornton, typed in bold. The world tilts. Mark's face. Oh, his face. It's a kaleidoscope of disbelief, then confusion, then a dawning, sickening horror. His confident smirk melts, replaced by a slack-jawed gape. The color drains from his cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, greenish hue. He tries to speak, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. But we discussed. His hand flies to his chest. His eyes, wide and terrified, dart from me to my father, then back to the papers that represent his utter demolition. He lurches forward, a choked sound erupting from him, and then he collapses. A heavy, undignified thud against the expensive carpet. Silence, then a collective gasp from the other board members. My father doesn't even flinch. He just looks at me, a silent question in his eyes. I look down at the papers, my name a beacon, and then at the man sprawled on the floor, the man who told my family I was useless without him. A strange, cold calm settles over me. If you've ever felt that ground shift beneath your feet, that moment where everything you thought was certain dissolves into a new, terrifying, or exhilarating reality, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you feel a connection to these stories, please subscribe. It helps me share more of them, more than you can imagine. Our life, before the cracks started to show, was comfortable. That's the word. Deceptively comfortable. Mark and I met in college. He was charming, ambitious, with a smile that could disarm a battalion. I was quieter, more studious, with a lineage tied to Thornton Industries, the manufacturing empire my grandfather built and my father expanded. I never flaunted it, but it was always there, a silent underscore to my identity. Mark found it fascinating. Or so I thought. We married young. The wedding was beautiful, a perfect blend of tradition and modern elegance, meticulously planned, mostly by my mother and me. Mark was happy to let us handle the details, always agreeable, always supportive. Or so it seemed. I started at Thornton Industries in the marketing department, learning the ropes, content to work my way up, to earn my place. I loved the hum of the machines, the smell of oil and metal, the sense of creating something tangible. It was in my blood. Mark, with his finance degree, found a lucrative position at an investment firm downtown. He was good at it, driven, always networking, always looking for the next big thing. Our evenings were pleasant.
Dinners out, cozy nights in.
We talked about our days, our dreams. Or rather, he talked about his, and I listened, offered support, celebrated his wins. My own aspirations, my quiet successes at Thornton, seemed smaller, somehow, in the glow of his ambition. He had a way of framing things, of making his challenges sound epic, his victories monumental. Mine, by comparison, were just part of the family business. Expected. Easy. He'd often say things like, "It's good you have Thorntons, Amelia. Gives you something to do," not unkindly, not exactly. More like a pat on the head. A gentle dismissal. I'd feel a flicker of something, annoyance? Resentment? But I'd push it down. He loved me.
This was just his way.
He was a high flyer. I was grounded.
Stable.
Perhaps, in his eyes, a little boring. My desire was simple, really. I wanted to be seen. Not as Thornton's daughter, but as Amelia. Competent, capable Amelia. I wanted his respect, not just his affection. I wanted him to see the fire in me, not just the comfortable hearth he came home to. He started expressing an interest in Thornton Industries a few years into our marriage. "It's a legacy, Amelia," he'd say, his eyes shining. "Think of what we could do with it." Together, the we sounded exciting, inclusive. My father, always cautious, offered him a mid-level consultancy role. A way to observe him, I realize now. Mark took it, of course, but he chafed under the title. He saw himself higher up, faster. He'd come home complaining about the old guard, the outdated methods, he'd tell me. They just don't see the potential. Your father, he's too sentimental. And then, looking at me with that earnest, persuasive gaze, you and I, we could really shake things up, make it something even bigger. I'd nod, flattered by the we, ignoring the subtle digs at my father, at the company I was growing to love deeply. I was too busy being the supportive wife, too enamored with the idea of being a power couple to see the blueprint of his ambition being drawn, with me as a stepping stone, not a partner. The family dinners. They used to be my sanctuary. Loud, chaotic, full of laughter and the aroma of my mother's cooking. Sunday evenings around the sprawling oak table in my parents' dining room. My brother, David, and his wife, Sarah, their kids. My younger sister, Chloe, still finding her way. And Mark. Mark, who had seamlessly integrated himself, charming my mother, talking business with my father, playing the affable uncle to my nieces and nephews. It was after one such dinner. We were lingering over coffee, the kids having scampered off. My father had been praising a recent marketing campaign I'd spearheaded, a small success, but one I was proud of. "Amelia has a good head for this," he'd said, a rare but cherished compliment. I felt a warm glow. Mark, beside me, had smiled, put his arm around my shoulder. "She learns quickly," he'd said. Benign enough. Later, as we were helping clear the table, I overheard him talking to my father and David in the study. The door was slightly ajar. I was carrying a tray of coffee cups, paused just out of sight. Mark's voice, usually so smooth, had a different edge to it. A kind of confidential, man-to-man tone. "She's got heart, sir, no doubt," he was saying.
I assumed he meant me.
But let's be honest, this business world, it's a different beast. Amelia, she's sheltered. She's wonderful, a fantastic wife, but strategy, the tough decisions? That's not really her forte. She's a bit lost without strong guidance. My breath hitched. The cups rattled on the tray. Strong guidance? Whose guidance? His. Then David, ever the pragmatist, said, "She did pull off that campaign, Mark." Dad was impressed. Mark chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "With a lot of my input behind the scenes, David. You know how it is. She has good instincts, but she needs someone to connect the dots. Frankly," and his voice dropped conspiratorially, "she's pretty useless without me holding her hand through the complex stuff. Wonderful girl, but her talents lie elsewhere. Homemaking, perhaps." The tray slipped from my numb fingers. Cups shattered on the hallway tiles. A cacophony of breaking porcelain. Silence from the study. Then my father's voice, sharp. Amelia? Is that you? I couldn't speak. Useless. Without him. The words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my mind. Useless. The man I loved, my partner, my husband, reducing me to an incapable child in front of my father and brother. The pieces of shattered ceramic on the floor felt like pieces of me. The immediate aftermath was a blur of feigned concern from Mark. "Oh, darling, are you all right? Let me help you with that." His hands, reaching for mine, felt cold, alien. My father and brother emerged, their faces unreadable. I mumbled something about being clumsy, my cheeks burning with a shame so profound it felt like a physical illness. No one mentioned what I'd overheard. Or, more accurately, no one admitted I'd overheard it. Mark was solicitous, overly attentive for the rest of the evening, a performance so convincing it made my stomach churn. The drive home was silent. I stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of pain. Useless without me, the phrase played on a loop, each repetition carving a little deeper. When we got to our apartment, I couldn't look at him. I went straight to the bathroom and locked the door, leaning against it, a sob finally tearing its way out. When I confronted him later that night, my voice trembling, he was masterful in his denial and deflection. "Sweetheart, you must have misunderstood. I would never say that. I was just telling your father how much I support you, how we make a great team, gaslighting, pure and simple." He painted me as overly sensitive, insecure. "You know I think the world of you, Amelia. Why would you even imagine I'd say something so cruel?" He held me, stroked my hair, his voice a soothing balm on a festering wound. And because I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too devastating, I let myself be soothed. For a while. But the seed was planted. A tiny, poisonous seed of doubt. I started watching him more closely, listening with a new, unwelcome filter. His support began to feel like subtle control. His advice on my work project started to sound like instructions, his critique sharper, more dismissive if I didn't immediately adopt his suggestions. He'd helpfully point out my minor mistakes in front of others at Thornton, always with a charming smile. "Oh, Amelia, bless her, just a small oversight. We'll fix it." Each instance was a paper cut, small and seemingly insignificant, but bleeding me dry of confidence.
My family, it was complicated.
My mother, bless her, probably believed Mark's version if he ever gave one. She adored him. David was harder to read. He'd look at me sometimes with a thoughtful expression, but he was busy with his own life, his own career path within a different division of the company. My father grew quieter around me, his praise rarer. Was he believing Mark? Was he seeing me as the useless daughter, propped up by her brilliant husband? The thought was a constant ache. I tried harder at work, putting in longer hours, taking on more responsibility. But every success felt hollow, tainted by the fear that Mark would somehow take credit, or that my father would attribute it to Mark's strong guidance. I felt increasingly isolated, adrift in my own life, in my own family's company. The easy comfort of our marriage was gone, replaced by a gnawing unease. The man I slept next to every night was becoming a stranger, his motives shrouded, his words double-edged. The poison of Mark's words spread, slowly at first, then with an insidious speed. He became more brazen in his efforts to position himself as the indispensable man at Thornton Industries. He'd arrange meetings with my father, excluding me, under the guise of not wanting to burden me with high-level strategy. He'd casually mention my supposed shortcomings to key department heads, always framed with concern. "Amelia's struggling a bit with the financial projections for Q3, but don't worry, I'm stepping in to help her out," or "She has such creative ideas, but sometimes the follow-through, well, I'm making sure things stay on track." I'd hear these things whispered back to me by sympathetic colleagues, usually couched in office gossip. Each report was another twist of the knife. I tried to counteract it, to be more assertive, more visible. I took on a challenging logistics overhaul project, something everyone said was a tangled mess. I worked late, poring over spreadsheets, coordinating with difficult suppliers, streamlining archaic processes. For a while, I thought I was making headway. There were small victories, tangible improvements. But Mark was always there, a shadow looming over my efforts. He'd find ways to insert himself, offering suggestions that subtly altered my plans, then taking credit if they worked, or blaming my original concept if they faltered. He was playing a masterful game of corporate chess, and I was, it seemed, just a pawn he was maneuvering. My attempts to speak to my father directly were met with a frustrating vagueness. "Mark is very driven, Amelia," he'd say. "He has a lot of ideas for the company." Was that approval? Was he blind to what Mark was doing to me, to my reputation? The family dynamic grew, increasingly strained. Sunday dinners became an exercise in tight-lipped smiles and carefully chosen words. Mark would dominate the conversation with talk of his vision for Thornton and his innovations. I'd sit there, feeling my voice shrink, my presence diminish. He once joked during dessert after I'd made a minor comment about a new market trend. "Oh, Amelia, still trying to keep up with the big boys, are we?" "It's cute." The table went quiet. My mother tittered nervously. David stared at his plate. My father's expression was unreadable. I felt a hot flush of anger and humiliation. Cute. He was systematically eroding my credibility, painting me as a well-meaning amateur in my own family's legacy. The worst part was the creeping self-doubt. Was he right? Was I really out of my depth? His constant undermining, his subtle gaslighting, it was like water torture.
Drip, drip, drip.
Until I started to question my own sanity, my own abilities. My desire for his respect had curdled into a desperate need to prove him wrong, but every attempt seemed to play right into his hands, making me look flustered or defensive, or, as he so kindly put it, emotional. The weight of it was crushing. I was fighting a war on two fronts, one for my place in the company, and another, far more painful, for my own sense of self. The shift, when it came, wasn't a lightning bolt, but a slow, cold dawning.
It was a Tuesday.
I was working late, trying to salvage a presentation Mark had helped me with, which now felt more like his presentation than mine. My office was quiet, the rest of the floor long since emptied. I was searching for a file on the shared drive, a specific market analysis I'd done months ago. I stumbled into a folder I didn't recognize, labeled Thornton_future_strategic_outline_MK, Mark's initials. Curiosity, a bitter, urgent thing, got the better of me. I clicked it open. Inside were documents, spreadsheets, even a mock-up of a new company letterhead. One document was a 5-year plan. As I scrolled through it, a chill snaked down my spine. It was a detailed, ruthless restructuring of Thornton Industries. Departments merged, long-term employees listed for phased redundancy, entire product lines discontinued. My father's passion projects, the ones that weren't high-profit but held sentimental value and provided stable local employment, were marked for termination. And then I saw the proposed new executive structure. At the top, CEO, Mark Keller. My father was listed as Chairman Emeritus, a ceremonial, powerless role. My brother, David, was shunted to a minor subsidiary. My name, Amelia Thornton Keller, was nowhere, not even in a token marketing role. I was erased. It wasn't just about him thinking I was useless without him. It was about him actively working to make me and my family's legacy as we knew it disappear. He wasn't just undermining me, he was planning a coup. The document even had notes in the margins, presumably from Mark to himself. One next to my father's proposed title read, "Transition out within 18 months. Full control necessary," next to a section about liquidating a community-focused division my grandfather started. Sentimental Deadwood. Maximize shareholder value, his vision. I sat there, staring at the screen, the fluorescent office lights buzzing overhead, feeling a cold fury replace the hurt and confusion. This wasn't a misguided husband trying to help, this was calculated. This was betrayal on an epic scale. He wasn't just dismissive, he was a predator, cloaked in charm and ambition. The dry humor that sometimes flickered within me turned to acid. So I was useless, was I? Good for homemaking?
Fine.
Let him think that. Let him underestimate me. Because in that moment, staring at his meticulous plan for my erasure, something in me hardened. The hurt was still there, a deep, throbbing ache, but now it had a companion, a steely, quiet resolve. He thought he was playing chess?
Fine.
I'd learn the game, and I'd play to win. Not just for me, but for everything he was trying to dismantle. The naive girl who craved her husband's approval died in that sterile office, under the hum of those unforgiving lights. A different Amelia began to take her place. The weeks that followed were a tightrope walk. Mark's confidence grew, fed by my apparent acquiescence. I played the part he'd cast for me. The slightly overwhelmed wife, grateful for his guidance. Inside, I was a furnace of cold rage and meticulous planning. He'd delegate tasks to me, tasks he deemed unimportant or tedious, and I'd complete them flawlessly, quietly. All the while, I was gathering my own intelligence. I copied the files from his Thornton_future_strategic_outline_MK folder onto a secure drive. I started paying closer attention to the company financials, to the departmental reports he was privy to, cross-referencing them with his vision. His attempts to discredit me became more overt, almost lazy, as if he believed he'd already won. At a major client meeting, after I'd presented a detailed proposal I'd worked on for weeks, he jumped in during the Q&A. "What Amelia is trying to say," he began, then proceeded to rephrase my key points as if they were his own, adding a layer of jargon that made him sound authoritative and me, by implication, unclear. The clients, old associates of my father, looked uncomfortable. My father, present at that meeting, just watched, his expression like stone. I felt the familiar sting, but this time, it fueled my resolve rather than my despair. He was overplaying his hand. The logistics overhaul project I'd been leading hit a snag. A major supplier unexpectedly declared bankruptcy. It was a genuine crisis, threatening our entire production schedule for a key product line. Mark seized the opportunity. "This is exactly what I was worried about," he said gravely in a hastily convened emergency meeting with my father and other senior managers. "Amelia's team didn't do enough due diligence on supplier stability. This is a rookie mistake." He then presented his own solution, a hastily cobbled-together plan involving an expensive, less reliable overseas supplier, which would eat into our margins significantly but would, he claimed, save the quarter. It felt like the final nail in my coffin. My father listened, his face grim. He didn't defend me. He didn't question Mark's assessment. He just nodded slowly and said, "We need to fix this. Mark, work with Amelia, but I want a proposed solution fast-tracked. Work with Amelia." It felt like a demotion, like I was now officially Mark's subordinate in my own project. The other managers looked at me with pity. All seemed lost. Mark gave me a sympathetic, patronizing smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry, darling," he whispered later. "I'll clean up this mess." That night, I went home and didn't sleep. The weight of his impending victory, of my apparent failure, was suffocating.
He thought he had me.
He thought Thornton Industries was his for the taking. He thought my father was finally seeing things his way. And for a terrifying few days, I almost believed it too. The company, my legacy, my very identity, seemed to be slipping through my fingers like sand. The despair was a thick, cloying fog. For 2 days, I went through the motions, a ghost in my own life. Mark was insufferably magnanimous, guiding me through the implementation of his solution for the supplier crisis, making sure everyone saw him taking charge. He was already acting like the heir apparent. The casual way he dismissed my suggestions, the confident stride he adopted in the hallways of Thornton Industries, it was all a performance of his inevitable triumph. Then, on the third night, staring at the ceiling of our bedroom, listening to Mark's steady, untroubled breathing beside me, something snapped. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden epiphany. It was a quiet, cold shift deep within. Enough. I was done being the victim. I was done letting him write my story. If I was going down, I was going down fighting, with my truth, not his carefully constructed lies. The next morning, I bypassed Mark entirely. I went to my father's office before anyone else arrived. I'd spent the last few hours of the night not sleeping, but preparing. Not an emotional plea, but a clear, concise presentation. I had the original logistics plan, the due diligence reports on the bankrupted supplier, which were thorough, showing it was an unforeseeable collapse, and, crucially, a viable, alternative local supplier I'd been vetting as a backup for months, someone Mark had dismissed as too small-scale. My alternative was more cost-effective and offered better long-term stability than Mark's rushed, expensive overseas option. And then, I laid out the contents of the Thornton_future_strategic_outline_MK folder. His 5-year plan, his notes, his intention to oust my father, to dismantle our legacy. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just presented the facts, coldly, clearly. This is his vision for your company, Dad. I said, my voice steady. This is what he truly thinks of you, of all of us. My father sat there listening, his face an unreadable mask. He picked up Mark's proposed restructuring plan, his eyes scanning the pages, lingering on the notes in the margin. The silence in his office was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the city waking up. When I finished, he didn't speak for a long time. He just looked at the papers, then out the window, then finally at me. There was a new light in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in months. Respect? Or perhaps understanding. Amelia, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Thank you for bringing this to me. I need some time to process this. But I want you to know, I've always seen your strength. Sometimes, a parent needs to let their child find their own way to demonstrate it, even if the path is difficult. He paused. Leave these with me, and say nothing of this to Mark. Let him continue as he is. A sliver of hope, sharp and bright, pierced through the gloom. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was something. A chance. I had laid my cards on the table. The decision was his. But for the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. I had armed my father with the truth. Now we waited to see if the truth was weapon enough. My determination wasn't just about confronting fate anymore. It was about reclaiming it, reshaping it with my own hands. Mark thought he was orchestrating a symphony of his success. He had no idea I was about to change the entire score. The days leading up to the board meeting were a masterclass in deception, on both our parts. Mark was buoyant, practically floating on a cloud of self-congratulation. He'd solved the supplier crisis, or so he told everyone, conveniently omitting that my father had, at the last minute, approved my alternative local supplier solution after a thorough review, effectively sidelining Mark's expensive plan. Mark, ever the opportunist, simply spun it as him having guided the team to a more optimal outcome. He was finalizing his visionary proposals for the company's future, hinting broadly at a major announcement. He even bought a new suit, a particularly obnoxious shade of sharkskin gray. He told me it was his power suit. I almost laughed. He was so convinced of his imminent victory, so blinded by his own arrogance, that he didn't notice the subtle shifts around him. He didn't see the way my father watched him now, with a new, assessing glint in his eye. He didn't register the slight coolness from some of the senior managers who had once been his eager audience. He was too busy rehearsing his acceptance speech. He even practiced his humble but firm leader persona in front of the bathroom mirror. I saw him once, adjusting his tie, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Soon, Amelia, he'd said, catching my reflection. Soon. All this will be ours. Well, mostly mine to manage, of course. You can focus on other things. He actually winked. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. My father called the special board meeting. The agenda was vague. Discussion of Thornton Industries' future leadership and strategic direction. Mark was ecstatic. This is it, Amelia, he crowed, pacing our living room. Your father's finally ready to pass the torch. He knows I'm the only one who can take Thornton to the next level. He paused, looking at me with a patronizing smile. Don't worry, I'll make sure you have a comfortable little office somewhere. Maybe head up the company charity. Something suitable. The irony was so thick I could have spread it on toast. He genuinely believed he was on the cusp of his greatest triumph, the culmination of years of careful manipulation and undermining. He thought my father had finally succumbed to his narrative, the one where I was the well-meaning but ultimately useless appendage, and he was the dynamic savior. He had no idea that my quiet, factual presentation to my father, armed with his own damning documents, had completely rewritten the script he thought he was directing. The stage was set, not for his coronation, but for his spectacular, public undoing. And the beautiful, terrible part of it? He was walking into it with a smile on his face, utterly, blissfully unaware that the tables hadn't just turned, they were about to be flipped over his head. And so we arrive, back in that crackling boardroom. My father, a monolith of controlled calm. Mark, practically vibrating with anticipation, his sharkskin suit gleaming under the recessed lighting. The other board members, a mix of long-serving executives and a few outside directors, look expectant, perhaps a little wary. They too have heard the rumors, felt the subtle shifts in power. My father's voice cuts through the tension. After careful consideration, he begins, his gaze sweeping the room before landing, with an almost imperceptible warmth on me. And a thorough review of performance, potential, and unwavering dedication to the future of this company. Mark leans forward, his smile fixed, his eyes greedy. He's picturing his name on the CEO's door, I'm sure of it. He probably already picked out the new furniture. I have made my decision. My father's hand moves, not towards Mark, but across the polished table. Towards me. The slim sheaf of documents slides to a halt directly in front of my worn leather portfolio. "Congratulations, Amelia," he says, his voice ringing with a conviction that silences every other sound in the room. "You are now the majority shareholder and CEO of Thornton Industries." The world stops. Or at least, Mark's world does. His jaw, which had been set in a confident line, drops. The color, the vibrant, arrogant flush of impending victory, drains from his face, leaving it a sickly, mottled gray. His eyes, wide and unblinking, fix on the papers before me as if they're venomous snakes. My name, Amelia Thornton, clear and undeniable. But he stammers, his voice a strangled croak. He pushes his chair back, a harsh scraping sound against the floor. We discussed the restructuring, my proposals. His hand, beautifully manicured, flies to his chest, clutching at the expensive fabric of his power suit. He looks wildly from me to my father, his carefully constructed composure shattering like glass. This is a mistake. Sir, you implied. My father's gaze is like ice. I implied nothing, Mark, he says, his voice cold and precise. I observed. I listened. And I reviewed your rather illuminating Thornton_future_strategic_outline, the one that saw fit to erase my daughter and pension me off. He lets that hang in the air for a beat. The other board members shift uncomfortably, some exchanging knowing glances. Mark flinches as if struck. That was a hypothetical exercise. Mark gasps, his breath coming in ragged pants. A contingency plan. Amelia knows. Amelia, tell them. He turns to me, his eyes pleading, desperate. The arrogance is gone, replaced by a raw, animal terror. This is the man who called me useless. This is the man who planned to discard me like yesterday's news. I meet his gaze, my own calm and steady. I don't say a word. I don't need to. The papers in front of me say everything. He lurches to his feet, knocking his chair over. No. You can't. I built this. I saved this. His voice cracks, escalating into a near shriek. He takes a staggering step towards my father, then sways. His eyes roll back. A choked, gurgling sound escapes him, and he collapses. Not a faint, a dead weight, hitting the plush boardroom carpet with a sickening thud. The man who stood so tall, so confident, so dismissive of my worth, now a crumpled heap on the floor. His power suit, so carefully chosen, now looks like a deflated costume. Silence. Then, a flurry of muted exclamations. Someone calls for security, for a medic. My father doesn't move, his expression unchanged. He simply looks at Mark's prone form, then back at me. A long, silent acknowledgement passes between us. It's over. The battle I'd fought in silence, the struggle to reclaim not just my company, but myself, has ended in this surreal, almost anticlimactic implosion of the man who caused it all. I look down at the ownership papers, my name a solid, reassuring presence. Amelia Thornton, CEO. Not useless. Not anymore. A strange mix of emotions swirls within me, the cold, sharp satisfaction of vindication. Yes, but also a profound, weary sadness for the man I thought I married, the dream that had turned into this ugly charade. He hadn't just underestimated me, he'd fundamentally misunderstood who I was. And in the end, that was his undoing. The aftermath was deficient. Mark was carted off to the hospital, a severe panic attack, they called it, brought on by acute stress. Or, as I privately termed it, acute comeuppance. He recovered, physically at least. Our lawyers spoke. His lawyer, initially blustering, grew remarkably subdued once my lawyer presented him with a copy of Mark's Thornton_future_strategic_outline_MK and a few choice emails I'd also uncovered detailing his plans to leverage company assets for a personal side venture he'd conveniently forgotten to mention. The divorce was swift and surprisingly quiet. He took his severance, which was stipulated in his original consultancy contract, and disappeared from my life and from Thornton Industries, with barely a ripple. The sharkskin suit, I imagine, went into storage. My family rallied. My mother, initially shocked and confused, eventually saw Mark for who he was, her disappointment palpable, but her support for me unwavering. David, my brother, clapped me on the back and said, "Took you long enough to show him who's boss, sis. Always knew you had it in you." It turned out David had his own suspicions about Mark, but had been waiting for me to make my move, respecting my battle. My father and I entered a new phase of our relationship. One built on mutual respect, on a shared understanding of the company's soul, and his quiet pride in me was a balm to old wounds. Stepping into the CEO role wasn't easy. There were doubters, people Mark had influenced. But armed with my own vision, one that valued innovation but also honored legacy, one that saw employees as assets, not redundancies, I began to rebuild. I implemented the logistics solutions I'd fought for. I initiated new projects that blended my father's experience with fresh perspectives. There were long days, tough decisions, moments of self-doubt still. But this time, the doubt was a healthy motivator, not a corrosive poison. I was no longer proving myself against someone, but for something, for the company, for its people, for myself. The boardroom, once a place of dread, became my arena. The long mahogany table no longer felt like an altar for Mark's ambition, but a space for collaboration, for forging the future. Sometimes, late at night, alone in my new office, my father's old office, which he insisted I take, I'd look out over the city lights and think of Mark. Not with anger anymore, but with a kind of detached pity. He'd wanted power so badly, he'd been willing to destroy everything and everyone in his path to get it. He never understood that true power isn't about control or dominance. It's about building, creating, earning respect, not demanding it. He'd called me useless without him. The irony is, he was the one who became useless, a footnote in a story where I was, finally, the author. It's a bittersweet victory, like most victories in life. I won my company, my self-respect, my future. But I lost a part of my past, the part that believed in the fairy tale, in the charming prince. That loss leaves a small, permanent ache, a reminder of the cost of illusions. But it also fuels a quiet strength. I am Amelia Thornton, and I am far from useless. This company, these papers, they weren't just about business in the end. They were about finding my own voice after someone tried to silence it, about discovering a strength I didn't know I possessed until I was tested. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever had to fight to reclaim your narrative, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.